right. Hello, everybody. I'm Jayme CheeseSlice, the engineer and producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. And today we've got a good show planned out for you today. We have Lucy Komisar. Sorry. We're going to talk about the Magnitsky Act and how it was a hoax and used to perpetuate more corruption and fraud and tax evasion and all that good fun stuff. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on Gloria and Jeremy. How you guys doing today?
Hey, Jayme. Hey, Jeremy.
And let's go ahead and bring in Lucy, and we can get started with the show. We're going to be recording. We're going to be recording for 1 hour for the radio at WBAI and the Progressive Radio Network. So let's get to it.
Hold on for 1 second. I just want to do a shout out to Ben Osicki, the lead guitarist and ringmaster. Today is his birthday. So happy birthday, nice. Ben.
Very nice. And Ringmaster is Gloria's band and whose music we use for the show. So Gloria, it's your time to shine. Let's do it.
Hey everyone, welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine, and our special guest, investigative journalist Lucy Komisar. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today's show is on the dangerous Magnitsky Act, Hoax. I'd like to add that beside our guest being an award-winning journalist, Lucy Komisar's career spans civil rights activism, feminist leadership, and as you will learn here, groundbreaking investigations into global financial corruption. While the Magnitsky Act and its economic sanctions are marketed as being in defense of human rights and in support of anti-corruption measures, the act in practice shielded William Browder and Mikhail Khodorkovsky from Russian prosecution for over $100 million in tax evasion and fraud by conveniently framing his Russian investigators, judges, Parisian officials, etc., as human rights abusers. But in a wider context, it is important for our audience to understand that economic sanctions are not only coercive and used for regime change by making the population of a targeted country scream, but they are an economic engine for U.S. and foreign banks. The lethal selection process that kills millions of black, brown, yellow, and red people is just a bonus for the predator class focused on eugenics and population control. I'd like for everyone to become familiar with the term lethal selection. It is the intentional denial of key inputs like medicines, and it is caused by the targeted damage to life-saving infrastructure like water filtration plants in targeted countries. This method of killing appears incidental and keeps the murderer's hands cleaner than mass execution with bombs or gunshots. Back to sanctions. Consider that frozen assets are only frozen to the targeted country, individual, or entity. The funds are made available to U.S. dealer banks tied to the New York Fed, like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America, and Morgan Stanley. Now let's return to the Magnitsky Act. When the U.S. expanded the act globally in 2017, it increased what should be called sanctified theft from just 18 to more than 740 foreign individuals and entities, and enabled dealer banks to go hog wild in their house of cards, repurchasing what we call repo market. While the high level of hypothecation in the repo market amplifies market liquidity, it also increases systemic leverage risk. To be clear, the repo market provides for the relending of collateral, like pirated foreign gold and currency, at about 7 times on average. According to the Fed, the gross size of the repo market is $11.9 trillion. For perspective, GDP in 2024 was $26 trillion. Thus, the repo market is nearly 45% of the entire US economy. And folks, that's a lot of risk. And some can argue too big to fail. According to the Federal Reserve ins and outs of collateral reuse, leverage at this scale means a default or disruption at one point in the chain can ripple through all linked trades, potentially multiplying losses far beyond the original position size. Surprise, surprise, this is why the US economy is really dependent on bogeyman enemies, because entities deemed authoritarian, drug traffickers, human rights violators, and money launderers can be robbed with impunity. Case in point is Trump's redesignation of al-Qaeda's leader, al-Jilani, now president of Syria. For more background, Magnitsky Act designees can be considered belonging to a subset of the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, specially designated nationals, SDN, and blocked persons list. The U.S. Treasury states it has over 17,000 names connected to sanctions targets. Nation-state sanctions affect roughly 1/3 of the world's sovereign states, approximately 60 to 70 countries. So 17,000 is a massive increase in opportunity for unbridled and justified theft. Consider that there are only 195 officially recognized sovereign states using the UN framework. Thus, under the Magnitsky Act and SDN, the wealth of 17,000 foreign individuals and entities are now available for pillage too. While the true dollar value remains hidden, when combining both sovereign and private assets, the approximate total comes to 358 billion frozen globally under U.S. bank sanctions for just Russia alone since 2022. Iran is 100 to 120 billion. Venezuela claims 22 billion, and Afghanistan is around 8 billion. Libya has about 37 billion frozen assets. Within this context, it seems economic sanctions are the latest weapon used in what can only be classified as armed robbery, with a pretentious and self-serving justification. It's no surprise its origins are fake too. Lucy, please explain the true history of the Magnitsky Act to our audience. Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning, because most people haven't read this in the mainstream media, which continues to lie about the story. But there are 11 myths that I wrote about in an article just published by the Realist Review, which you can get online. The first myth is that Sergei Magnitsky was a lawyer hired by William Browder in 2008 to deal with a tax refund fraud of 2007, which I will explain shortly. But no, he was an accountant working for Browder since 1995, over more than a decade before that. And his job was to handle Browder's tax evasion and illicit stock buys. And he was called to testify he was interrogated by authorities in Russia, and his interrogations, which are online, English translation, list him as an auditor. So how did this get started? A company named Firestone Duncan was owned by a former Ernst & Young employee named Konstantin Ponomarov. His junior partner was an American, Jameson Firestone, and in 1995, Ponomarov hired Sergei Magnitsky, who had been an economics school classmate. And he told me, Konstantin Ponomarov told me in an email, I knew Sergei since 1998. We studied at the Russian Economics Academy. In 1994, I recommended him to be hired by Ernst & Young in Moscow, where I worked. And in 1995, we created Firestone Duncan, and I hired Sergei to work as deputy head of the audit department in that company. In the beginning of 1996, Hermitage Capital, which was run by Browder, became our client. And Browder was assigned Magnitsky to be in charge of his account. They needed tax planning. One of the aspects of tax planning was buying Gazprom shares in the local market, but that was banned to foreigners. So they set up shell companies that pretended to be Russian. And that was the beginning of Sergei Magnitsky working with Browder to organize thievery. Then the second myth is that Browder was an honest investor who went after corrupt Russian companies. No, Browder's most famous investment was Evisma in '97, and Magnitsky is working for him then, bought into a transfer pricing fraud to cheat minority investors. Transfer pricing is you set up a shell company and maybe you buy inputs for something and you buy them at a very high price. So it's marked in when you get it to the this transfer pricing company, which you secretly control, and then you sell the finished product at a very low price. So put together the high price for the inputs, the low price for what you get when you sell it. If you have investors, they are getting cheated. They're not making a profit. The tax authorities in the country are also getting cheated because your books are corrupt. So this is what he did. The Evisma story was, Evisma meant aviation special materials. It made titanium sponge and it sold it for places like Boeing. So
now, Lucy, I had to look up that titanium sponge, and what I came up with is it's an intermediate product, and that it's not the finished product. And what they do is they refine it more, and then they can make ingots out of the titanium, and then they can use that for making airplanes and certain things in aviation. Thanks.
So Mikhail Khodorkovsky and his bank Menatep, and Khodorkovsky is another crook who has worked with Browder. They bought 60% of Evisma, which was doing the and Khodorkovsky had gotten it at a knockdown price through one of the loans for share scams in the mid-1990s, through which Yeltsin made government properties collateral for loans that he would never repay. So, and Menatep, Khodorkovsky's Menatep, also bought into an Isle of Man shell company operator called Valmet. And Valmet was used to do the fakery, the transfer pricing fakery. So then what happened then, in the late 1990s, Khodorkovsky decided to sell Evisma. It had then a quarter of the world market for titanium sponge. Now it says a third. And it claimed 100 million in sales. But remember, this is a long time ago, so it's a big money now. And profits of 15 million. But those profits were reduced by the transfer pricing. And then Khodorkovsky decided to sell this, and he sold it to Browder and partners, which the major partner was Dart Cup Air, Kenneth Dart, and a small group called Anderson Group Investors. So they got 60%. There were still minority investors. And the lawyer later said in a lawsuit, he had to give testimony, the transfer pricing scheme was what made the transaction profitable. Then the partners sold Evisma to Russian owners. And they had a lawyer, a Philadelphia lawyer who also had an office in Moscow. And he told me, Lucy, when they sent me to look at the books, which were in London, he said, I couldn't believe it. They sent me to look at the Evisma books, which had all kinds of documents showing that they were a fraud, that they were ripping off the minority investors. They were looting the company. They were stealing from the Russian tax authorities. And the reason that the documents were there was pretty funny, because there's no honor among thieves. The guy that ran Valmet was Peter Bond, very notorious money launderer. And they claimed that at a certain point, when they transferred the company from Khodorkovsky to the group, Browder and Dart and Baker, that this guy, Peter Bond, was keeping some of the loot. We should get all of that loot, the stuff that you have skinned. They sued him in the Isle of Man. Now, in the Isle of Man, civil suits are secret except for both parties, unlike in the US, where you can see when somebody files a lawsuit, you can see it. But then they didn't realize that And then they made a settlement. They didn't realize that when they sold Avisma to the company, which was called VSMPRO, another acronym for a company that used the titanium sponge, that their lawyer would go to London and look at the documents, find the lawsuit where they are saying, hey, our deal was we were going to get this rake off. It wasn't profitable if we didn't get the rake off. Well, they sued Browder and friends in a RICO suit in New Jersey, and they had all the documents. So, of course, Browder and his crooked partners had to settle. So when you hear Browder saying, and I fought corruption in Russia, he's a liar. I mean, he carried out corruption in Russia. Of course, this is not, although you could find in the in small articles in the American press when the deal with the lawsuit was settled, they never really explained what happened. Nothing. There were 2 paragraphs. What happened? I went to the lawyer's office in Philadelphia and went through 10 big boxes of all the documents and of the case, and very solidly showed that Browder is a crook. Now, the next part of the story is the tax refund fraud. Now, let me explain what that was about. It was something that really happened. It was stopped by the government when they found out what was going on. But a crooked company, and there had been one that did it before Browder did it, would set up some shell companies. They would sue your company, real company, and say, we had a contract for XYZ, and you didn't do the contract, and we lost a lot of money, and we are suing you for X amount of dollars. So that these shell companies were set up. They sued Browder. They sued him for the exact amount of profits that Hermitage had made for the previous year, which happened to be about $1 billion. The taxes that were paid would have been about 230 million, and that's what was demanded, and the Browder company said, oh yes, we will pay that, and they did. And then Browder later said, oh, somebody else had taken over my company, and because it was done through subsidiaries of his company. But and so we didn't really know about it. But that was a lie, because they had gotten notices from the court that went to the mailbox of that Magnitsky monitored. He got notice of these things that were happening and never did anything about it. So there's a lot of indication that Browder was doing the fraud. He claimed that Russian officials had gone into there was a search of offices, of Browder's office and Firestone Duncan, the accountant, but they were looking for information about the tax evasion and one of them was in 2006. The tax refund fraud wasn't until 2007, so that couldn't have been connected. But they Browder would say, and this has been written about in the major American press, that they went in and in these searches, they took stamps and documents, and they were able to register the companies in their name. Well, come on, what are you smoking to believe that? In what country in the world can some disaffected person with the keys to the cabinets go in and take some stamps and some documents and announce, this is now my company? Come on. Under the law in Russia, you need to go to the company house. The person who actually set up the company has to go in person to the company house or provide someone with a power of attorney. And that was obviously not done. And so this whole assertion is totally fake. But it's written about still that all they did was take over some stamps, and they took over the companies. And then the next myth is that Magnitsky pointed to the Russian officials as culprits because they had done a search before the tax refund fraud and after. But when he gave testimonies, he didn't accuse anybody. Browder says he did, but he didn't. He never did. And all of those testimonies are online in English translation, and the reporters in the US and UK newspapers that repeat this fakery. Never look at, did he actually say that? No, he didn't actually say that. So this tax refund fraud was going on. I talked to the lawyer named Andrei Pavlov, who admitted he actually worked on this and said, yeah, another group had actually done it before. His first client was called the Renaissance Group. And in Browder's own book, Red Notice, he talks about meeting with the Renaissance CEO in London 2 weeks before the scam payout to his of his companies. And he's why is he meeting with this guy? Well, this guy is saying, listen, we can help you disestablish those companies because you maybe have some trouble because they had done the same scam. According to the Andrei Pavlov, the lawyer, they had done the same scam. So there's all this solid evidence, and that is basically ignored. He said, "We'll help you liquidate the stolen companies." Why would he ask Browder to let him do that? Browder asks, and in his book, acts like he doesn't understand it. But to the meeting that he went, he cut short a Middle East trip to go to this meeting. He did the tax refund for it. But I couldn't figure out why he put that smoking gun into his book, because it really is a smoking gun. And then he just continued to make up stories. Whoops.
Okay, we seem to have lost Lucy for a moment.
Yeah, I was going to ask her about, because Browder then was a key figure lobbying for the Magnitsky Act based on a lot, and just to give some context for the viewers, this was really significant in the growth of the new Cold War, because the Obama administration had initiated a reset policy in its first term. There had been hostilities under the Bush administration, particularly the Georgian conflict. Russia was accused of aggression in Georgia, although an EU commission actually found the Georgians responsible for provoking that conflict. And really, the U.S. was kind of trying to draw the Georgians into a trap. In any event, Obama had his reset policy, but then you have the Magnitsky Act. The story was blown up that Browder had his companies robbed, and that the Russians had tortured, supposedly his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, tortured him to death in a Russian prison, and that he was a whistleblower. And this showed the dastardly nature of the Putin government, and it was used to kind of mobilize anti-Russia sentiment. And Browder used his clout, and his money. He hired, Dick Cheney's personal secretary as a lobbyist. So, and she got him meetings with John Kerry and John McCain. And then I think he was financing political figures who jumped on the anti-Russia bandwagon, like the senator from Maryland, a lot of the Democratic Party. Senator Ben Cardin was a key figure pushing for the passage of the Magnitsky Act. And it was based on this premise that Magnitsky was a whistleblower who had been tortured in a Russian prison, and Russia was a major human rights violator. So the U.S. had to impose sanctions on Russia, and that got the ball rolling for the new Cold War. And then 2 years later, you had the Obama administration supporting a coup in Ukraine and then arming the Ukrainian government as it attacked the people of eastern Ukraine and ultimately drew Russians into a conflict. And they used other fake pretexts for more sanctions, like the Skripal poisoning. I just had an article today in the Covert Action magazine on the poisoning of Sergei Skripal was blamed on Russia. That Russian, carried out Novichok poisoning on a Russian defector because Skripal had been in the Russian intelligence service. But in fact, there's no evidence of that the Skripals were poisoned. The story actually, totally breaks down, because supposedly there was poison put on their doorknob, but then a police came and he touched the doorknob and he would have been dead, but he suffered no symptoms at all. and then they made like they fed the ducks. They set up the scene to make it look like, they spread the false stories. And in any event, where they were poisoned was right near a facility where the British manufactured Novichok poisoning.
That's a great article, Jeremy, but let's stick
in any
with
event, my
Magnitsky.
point is that they keep, well, it relates to Magnitsky because they keep using false pretexts to and false accusations against Russia to impose these sanctions that, and starting with the Magnitsky Act, it poisoned U.S.-Russian relations. I mean, there was hope in the first Obama term for a reset. And, in the 2012 debate, if people remember, Obama even attacked Mitt Romney. They asked, the question was, what's America's greatest threat? And Mitt Romney started going off about Russia, and Obama mocked him. He was like, we're not in the Cold War anymore. But then yet, once he was president, he enacted, or a few months after the debate, he signed into law the Magnitsky Act, and he backed the coup. Then they have all these false allegations against the Russian, like the Skripal, and it sets in motion what we're experiencing now, a dangerous new Cold War where a huge amount of resources are going into the military, huge billions of dollars going into Ukraine to confront the Russian menace. But again, these are fabricated stories. It's all fraud. And Gloria, you outlined at the beginning the underlying agenda of the sanctions, which is to steal money from people.
Well, sanctions are to create a justification to steal money. You need this bogeyman, you need this enemy, so that you could say this person is a drug cartel, it is a human trafficker, it is a terrorist. And then once you do that, then the gloves are off. You can do whatever you want as far as stealing goes, because now you have cover. So, I mean, it's a different way of looking at it. And, I've been involved in, this group, Sanctions Kill, and the humanitarian implications for sanctions are just terrible. I mean, you have millions of people that are outrightly killed, and others that are disabled as children. They get developmental disabilities because they don't have clean water or enough nutrition. So really what goes on is really a tremendous amount of eugenics and this, lethal selection of just killing a certain part of the population. So it's these sanctions are really hideous. So it's really not a surprise that even the origins, I mean, they tell us that Magnitsky was an attorney. He wasn't an attorney. He was an accountant.
Yeah, and he was not a whistleblower. He was actually collaborating with the Russian government because his specialty as an accountant, I think Lucy will go into this more when she comes back, was to help very wealthy people like Browder to offshore their money and all kinds of accounting tricks to help them out. And he was involved in white collar crime. So they made him like he was this hero. But then he was actually collaborating with the Russian government. So the Russian government had no motive to kill him. And in fact, there is suspicion he either died of a medical ailment, or if somebody killed him, it would have been Browder paying the Russian mafia to kill him, which can happen in Russian prisons, because he was working with the Russian government against Browder, and he knew all of Browder's secrets. And, this case shows how these wealthy billionaires, unscrupulous billionaires, can manipulate U.S. governmental policy, because Browder had his own agenda of deflecting attention away from his white-collar crimes. And to save himself from being prosecuted, he spun it that he was the victim of the big bad Russians and that his lawyer was killed. And, he wanted to punish the Putin government, and he had the resources to lobby, to hire the top lobbyists. And he was financing political figures like Ben Cardin through the Schiff Brothers investment fund to get the Magnitsky Act. And he contributed to significantly to the poisoning of U.S.-Russian relations when there had been hope under the Obama first term. And as far as Magnitsky, the story, Lucy in her article has really good evidence that the official story makes no sense. They claim like guards came in and beat him up, but all the forensic evidence makes clear that couldn't have happened the way it was described. So.
But all of that was interesting too. I had written under a pseudonym 2 articles on the prison system, where I looked at how medical treatment is given to prisoners in our institutions. And one of the main things I discovered is that we have the largest per capita incarceration rate in the world. That's we can brag about that as Americans. We have the largest incarceration rate per capita in the world. And the way that we treat our prisoners is we don't give them medical treatment. And when I read about the treatment that Magnitsky got, he got actually quite a lot of treatment relative to what we would give in the United States. And it seemed that he was staying in like the Hilton of the Russian prisons, that Russia had absolutely no desire to have him die, that he was useful. And they wanted him to live, and he was in the swank section.
Browder, and we can go back to Lucy's to make one point, feeding off what you're saying. Yeah, it's ridiculous that they would apply sanctions on Russia for allegedly bad prison conditions when we have horrific overcrowding in our prisons. And I've been doing a set of articles and investigating reporting in the state of Oklahoma, where they've had horrific torture of inmates, systematic rapes in women's prisons that were being covered up, and the whistleblowers who worked for the prison staff who were reporting rapes were being fired. Inmates are dying of neglect. They're forced into cells where they have no showers. And there have been deaths this way. So, I mean, you can sanction the state of Oklahoma. But yeah, in this case, the facts just didn't match up. So we have Lucy back. Yeah,
okay, I'm glad I'm back. I'm sorry, my computer.
It's
just
okay.
That's okay. And we were addressing the larger context of how this.
One thing I wanted Lucy to say, if you remember Lucy, is he asked Magnitsky asked for all kinds of stuff in his Hilton suite in the prison system in Russia, and he got it, and he got whatever he asked for. It seems within days, if not a week.
A kettle. He complained he didn't get the TV set soon enough, and a refrigerator. Let me finish on the reason. This tax refund fraud is one of the big parts of the story, which is written about, and this is why one of the reasons a lot of the investigators, judges, and so on are on the Magnitsky list, the act, because Browder said they were involved in this terrific fraud, and they arrested Magnitsky because he blew the whistle on the fraud. Well, not only did he blow the whistle, but there's a guy named Mikhail who was involved, and I got some of it from Andrei Pavlov, but some of it's been written about in Russian press. They really were doing this scam, and then this other company, Renaissance Group, was involved in it and was talking to Browder about this. But so this guy Markelov was the one that handled it, because it wasn't being handled by people with names. They would hire somebody who was a crook, a middle-level crook, to do the deal. Well, when Markelov, and this testimony is public, when he was arrested, they found out who had done it, and he served some time, I think 5 or 6 years in jail. And what he said, he was interrogated about how it worked. And he said, well, he would get documents from somebody came, his name was Sergei Leonidovich. Well, Magnitsky's name is Sergei Leonidovich Magnitsky. So he's basically saying Magnitsky was in cahoots. He helped to do the tax refund fraud. They needed to do file documents. These fake companies that said, you owe us all this money. They needed some documents. So Magnitsky provided the documents. So do you think he did it on his own? Well, I don't think so. I have a feeling that Browder did it, but Browder's name is not in the testimony because Markelov only knew the name of Sergei Leonidovich. And so that was done. So this is really important. A lot of this stuff is I got it. The mainstream media could get it. They don't want to get it because they would rather have the lie. But because that's the heart of the Magnitsky Act is the people. One part was that they were corrupt, that they stole this $230 million, which were the taxes that Russia Treasury refunded to the people that were doing the scam. But of course, I think obviously Magnitsky was in on it, and probably therefore Browder was in on it. And the other part was that they arrested Magnitsky. So without the scam, the theft, which where a lot of Russian officials and tax investigators and other government officials were named, then there was a detention of Magnitsky. That's the other part of the reason for the Magnitsky Act. So he was arrested in late of 2008. He had already been interrogated 3 times, once in 2006, then twice in 2008. And the myth is he was arrested because he accused the Russian officials of involvement in this 2007 tax fraud. But he was interrogated a year earlier for the Hermitage tax evasion. And there's nothing in the testimonies, which are public, accusing anyone. Now, who is the whistleblower? A woman named Rima Starova. She was a figurehead director of a shell company that was used in the fraud. And she saw a report in Kommersant, which is a Russian business publication, about Browder's illegal stock buys, that the buys of Gazprom, which were then limited. It's a very strategic company. They didn't want a lot of Western mega million billionaires coming in and buying up the strategic company. And you could get it because it was stock. So only Russian nationals could buy it, or else they could buy a much smaller amount as ADRs in London. ADR is American Depository Receipt. And it was limited how much they could buy. This was a security issue for the Russians. So Kommersant was writing about the illegal stock buys because Browder and Magnitsky, they had set up shell companies with Russian names. We are buying these Gazprom shares and we're all Russians. Well, no, you're not Russians. You're the head of a shell company. So then when she saw that, she got nervous, and she actually went to the police because she thought they would find her because she was the figurehead director of one of the companies that was the money had supposedly come from here to there through some company and another company, and she was the figurehead director of one of the companies. So the fact that he accused people of this fraud, no, he didn't accuse anybody. Then all this was going on, there'd been a tax case against Browder starting in the early 2000s, and that had to do with using Kalmykia. Kalmykia is in a region, the only region in Russia which is majority Buddhist. And they had a tax law that said, if your company hires at least 50% disabled workers, you get a very big tax write-off. So that was what the Buddhists wanted to do. So Browder naturally set up his shell companies in Kalmykia, which is, an hour or 2 plane ride from Moscow. He didn't have anything else going there. And then announced, Magnitsky went to Kalmykia and found some workers who, for money, would announce that they were employed by these shell companies as stock analysts. They were all manual laborers. They were gardeners. They were manual laborers. They were not stock analysts. So this was the tax evasion that Russia had been chasing Browder since the early 2000s, and that's what they were investigating Magnitsky on, the tax evasion. And things take a very long time. And in between, Browder had paid off a guy who then admitted that he'd been paid off to try to shut down the case. Then it opened again. So, but then by the time they reopened it in 2008, Browder was out of the country. There was nobody left to give out bribes. Magnitsky was called again to give testimony. And by the way, Browder didn't get his visa renewed at one point. I think it was in 2006. And he said, because he was a national threat, Putin had his eye on me. Well, you didn't get it because he was thieving and buying Gazprom illegally. So of course he was a security threat. So they didn't let him in again because he was a thief. And
could we circle back a little bit to Magnitsky and just to make sure our audience is really on board with this? it's alleged that he was murdered.
Okay, we're getting to that. Okay.
We should really kind of focus on that lie. Thanks.
Wait a minute. The murder happens after the arrest. So let's do the arrest first. And then, by the way,
we have about 15 to 20 minutes. So
okay. The European Court on Human Rights said Magnitsky was preparing to flee abroad and the arrest was justified. That's a European court. Then also Browder said, he protested about Magnitsky suffering. No, during the 1 year in prison, he did not organize a campaign to free him. He did nothing. There was not a word. Only when he was, and even after he died, okay, the death, he had a lot of medical problems. He got attention for them, but not very good attention. I think he brought up earlier. He asked for a TV and refrigerator, and he asked for repairs in the cell. And, there were minor things.
Browder he got him within like a week.
He got them. Yes. Browder says there were numerous violations, but he doesn't provide any information about any of the violations. And he was saying he was tortured every day. He filed 450 complaints. He never published them when they arrived.
Lucy, I also want you to explain how Magnitsky was so important to the Russians. He was in the Hilton wing, and they wanted him to live because they wanted Browder. They didn't really want him. They wanted to hold him for Browder.
They had no reason to want him dead because there's another prisoner at the time named Lurie, who was a journalist who was there because for the bad reasons he'd been accused by somebody who was a crook, and he got let out, and in fact the prosecutor apologized to him because he shouldn't have been there. But he met Magnitsky in jail, and Magnitsky the first time he met him, and this guy Lurie was well known because he was a journalist and he was helping some of the prisoners. But Magnitsky said to him, "Oh, my employers, they're going to get me out. They're going to get me out of here." Then he saw him again. He would see them in the holding pen where prisoners were brought before they were taken to some place, maybe for medical care, maybe for some court hearing. So there were times when you could meet other people. And then he said to him the second time, "They're selling me out. They are selling me out." And of course, Browder was. Browder, he could have gotten out if he had paid the taxes that he owed. He could have gotten out, but he didn't care. So then in the end, it looks like Magnitsky would have been willing to talk. And so Browder wanted Magnitsky dead. He was much more useful dead than alive. And the Russians had no reason to see him dead. Browder is such a gifted PR man, but he didn't say a word to the press all the time when he was arrested. And at one point, when he said some things, he would briefly mention that a lawyer or accountant being arrested, but nothing about being abused in prison. And he didn't go to any of the human rights groups, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. He didn't go to any of the Russian groups like Memorial or the Moscow Helsinki group. They went to none of them. And one of them actually wrote an article about it saying, "I knew nothing about Sergei Magnitsky. I didn't hear from Hermitage." So it was fake that he tried to do something. And he always said, and then he said, "Well, the Russians killed him." Well, the first 2 years, he never said the Russians killed him. He said, "I don't know how he died, maybe from neglect. He doesn't know how he died. Badly treated, we don't know." But, and of course, the Russian, the report of the coroners, which is put out, there's a Russian NGO report that put that out, and the Cambridge U.S. Physicians for Human Rights report said Magnitsky died of badly treated disease. And that
he had diabetes, I recall, and then he also had there was another one,
hepatitis.
Hepatitis, that was it. He had hepatitis.
He had a lot of bad diseases, but Browder started, and Browder, you could see there's a video. He spoke at San Diego Law School. He talked at Chatham House in London. There's a transcript. In each of them, he says, "I don't know how he died." Each of them, audio, video, text. Then he changed his mind. Now, why did he change his mind? Well, in collaboration with Jonathan Weiner, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Law, he was the vice president of the PR firm APCO, which represented Khodorkovsky. And they invented this because the Russians were now going after Browder on tax evasion charges. So
this was a way to cover their tracks. This was the way to eliminate their accusers, because they went after the officials, they went after everyone you could imagine.
The Magnitsky Act said that Browder and Khodorkovsky would not be given up to any other country for crimes. You know, there's something called the MLAT Treaty, a mutual legal defense, and all the countries work with each other. And when they've got serious criminal cases, but this one, they were immune. The whole thing was a get out of jail free card for Browder. It was the Browder Khodorkovsky Protection Act, and on the issue, and he would continue. I mean, he would embellish his story. Then he said 8 Russian guards had entered Magnitsky's cell and beaten him for 80 minutes with rubber batons. Well, so what's the possibility? The Public Oversight Commission put out a report practically all the minutes of the last day. Now remember, that was 80 minutes. His treatment of doctors, where he was for 80 minutes. There was not even 30 minutes when guards could have been in the cell beating him when he was not with somebody else that was written. And then Andrei Nekrasov, the filmmaker, measured the cell. He said 8 guards could not fit in there. And of course, the coroner's report showed no marks on Magnitsky's head or body. Browder put out photos of bruised wrists and ankles, which came from him banging on metal bars, and it was in the coroner's report. None of them life-threatening, of course. He didn't put out the photos, which I got, showing on the body no marks at all in the same coroner's report. He put out a death certificate saying Magnitsky suffered closed cerebral cranial injury, but there was no sign of it. And his mother gave testimony that said that years before he had fallen on the street.
Magnitsky's mother.
Magnitsky's mother. He fell on the street, hit his head, and had headaches for years. That was the closed cranial injury. Plus, the death certificate, which Browder manipulated, also said no signs of violent death detected. So,
but I think the main thing is that, you know, when we look at motive, okay, there's certainly a motive on the part of Browder to get rid of Magnitsky because he knows what happened. Yes. But there's no motive for the Russians to kill him. They want to keep him alive.
They wanted him alive.
They can use him against Browder. So the whole concept of motive is just wiped right out. But
at the end, Magnitsky was telling Lori and probably other people, because when you're talking, there must have been other people hearing what he was saying. My employers have sold me out. That's what he was telling Lori. And Lori, by the way, testified in U.S. federal court about this. He swore testimony, and it's all in English. Anybody can get this. Of course, if the New York Times and Washington Post cared, they would get it, but they don't. And he talked about what Magnitsky had told him, that his employers had sold him out. So all of these people were.
One thing I want to return to as we run out of time.
Yeah, I have one question.
One thing I want to return to, I think, is really important, is once the banking industry found out how useful this could be, they jumped on board and said, "Hey, sanctions against individuals and individual entities, as opposed to just on countries, is a gold mine."
Let me finish that, because you talked a lot that's very interesting, and you talked about it at the start. But I want to talk about it, the government case, the Justice Department, because they know the truth and they lied. Now, Preet Bharara, who was the U.S. attorney, Browder got him to sign on to his proxy lawsuit against Prevezon, which is a Russian real estate company, saying that it stole $230 million from the Treasury. And it just happened the company was owned by the son of a top Russian railroad official. But he was accused of stealing the $230 million. Then somebody checked. they amended the case. He stole 1.5 million. That was 1%. How could you make that mistake? Because you wrote what Browder told you instead of going for the facts. And Barara said there's Russian government corruption, and Magnitsky discovered it, and he has the documents. Well, there is no such claim in the DOJ Prevezon case. They couldn't, because there isn't any evidence, but he continues to lie. The chief investigator of the Justice Department, Todd Hyman, admitted in an interrogation that he had no witnesses except Browder. He's the chief investigator. You don't contact anybody else. He was asked by John Moscow, formerly of the U.S. District Attorney's Office for many, many years. Well, did you contact any of the banks about where the money was moving? He said, well, no, they're all foreign banks. And John Moscow, with his wit, said, really? Does your phone go long distance? It was all fake. And Barara, who was the U.S. attorney, now invites Browder on his podcast and introduces him as a friend. Now, is that how a government attorney introduces a person who got him to promote a lawsuit in the name of the U.S. government? So,
one thing I looked up based on
a question before.
Wait, let me just say this one. I looked up
the Magnitsky story and not other things, because
I looked up Preet Barara. I looked him up, and I wanted to know if he had any connections to Soros. Well, he didn't, but his deputy, Boyd Johnson, after leaving, went to work for Soros. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we were discussing, Lucy and I, before this, just this whole concept of short sales and things like that. And I figured there was a Soros fingerprint.
I have not seen that here. I've not seen. There's one last point, which was that the European bankers laundered the tax refund cash. And Browder, what he would do is he would make an announcement. He would make a complaint to some country court saying, this bank here, Deutsche Bank or whatever it is, they laundered this money. The court would say, I'll look into it. We will look into it. He would put out a press release. The courts are investigating that this bank, that would make the headlines. They're investigating it. He made many charges. There was never any case he brought that went anywhere, but people were hurt. In one case, the CEO of Swedbank in Estonia was fired because he accused the bank of laundering money. He charged that the Danske Bank had laundered money. And as a result, the Estonian authorities ordered that branch closed. And the person who was running it committed suicide. The chief executive officer of Danske Bank in Estonia committed suicide. So if there's any murderer around, Browder is the murderer. At least we know that much, that at least that person committed suicide as a result of Browder's false claims. The Swiss in 2020 closed the case based on Browder's invented charges that the money from the tax refund fraud entered there. All of these stories are known. None of them are. They get a blip in the press, and nobody says how come over a dozen cases were brought by Browder and none of them went anywhere. All turned out to be fake. Why don't they don't write that? Okay, those are my 11 points. Please go to my website.
With the remaining time, if you can just address how Browder lobbied the U.S. Congress and his connection with Senator Cardin and the Ziff brothers.
Well, okay, Cardin is not running again. Good, Senator from I guess it's Maryland, isn't it? Or Delaware?
Yeah.
So he was the guy that he introduced Magnitsky Act along with some others. McCain was a sponsor, and McGovern, the Democrat of Massachusetts, was a co-sponsor. And part of the problem is if you say something is against the Russians, members of Congress are really frightened, because if you're against it, and in fact at a certain point Bernie Sanders opposed this legislation, then you're accused of sleeping with Putin. They have no guts. So that's one of the problems. The Ziff brothers are the owners of the big Ziff media empire, and they were clients of Browder, who they bought some of the illicit Gazprom shares. The shares were illicit, but their buying them were illicit. So they were clients. They were big clients of Browder, and they also have contributed a lot to the Democratic Party. So it's on all sides, political sides. It's because Cardin's also Democrat. So you got Cardin and McGovern Democrats, McCain a Republican. It's all the parties, and very few people will take the chance of being accused of sleeping with Putin. And the media, which should be telling the truth, lies about this. Lies.
Yeah, and following that up, often Browder is used as a source for the claim that Putin is the richest man in the world and stole all this money. Is that not right? There's no actual evidence of that.
There's zero evidence. He's actually said, at one point he said, well, he got all this money, and he was asked about it. Well, I really don't have the evidence. Yes, he makes it up. He has no evidence.
But the media cites him as the main authority. And if you talk to the average person, they'll say, oh, Putin, he's so corrupt. He stole all this money.
Browder is the one who stole the money. Yeah. Browder is the one who stole the money.
Yeah.
And there is evidence about that. And of course, he set up bank accounts, Mossack Fonseca, the Panama Papers. He had a Mossack Fonseca company. I have a copy of a corporation papers that was set up for him in the British Virgin Islands. That's one of the places he was hiding his money. His own company, a Hermitage, was set up also offshore. I mean, he used offshore to move his money and to hide assets, and that's where the money chasers, money laundering chasers, that's where they should be looking, instead of a place where there's zero evidence. And he has admitted that he doesn't have any evidence, but that part never gets written about. It's just, and he stole all this money. Is there evidence? We don't need evidence. What are you, sleeping with Putin?
Mm-hmm. And now Browder, he renounced his U.S. citizenship. What is he up to today? He's not even a U.S. citizen anymore.
Well, the reason he did that was because he was stashing his assets offshore. In the U.S., if you stash your assets offshore, you still have to pay taxes on the profits. In the UK, which runs a lot of these offshore places, you don't have to pay taxes on your profits. So that's why, so he changed his citizenship. And it was really funny when McCain referred to him as a great American who's changed his passport so he didn't have to pay taxes. What's so great about that? Mm-hmm. But that was
he is a great American for the repo market and the New York Fed and all the dealer banks, because, this expanded to 17,000 individuals. And we got a question in the chat saying, what is the Magnitsky Act? And basically, it's drilling down from nation state sanctions to individual entities. So it widens who you can steal from. It was fantastic.
It was passed in December 2012, at a time when prior to that, U.S.-Russian relations were heading on a good direction, and it just set the groundwork for the new Cold War and the war in Ukraine, I think.
Yeah, well, I agree, but it also allowed...
Let me tell you what it says. The Magnitsky Act is aimed at, and this is what it says, aimed at people responsible for or who benefited from the detention, abuse, or death of Magnitsky, or who participated in concealment efforts, or was involved in the criminal conspiracy he uncovered, or was responsible for killings, torture, and other human rights violations committed against individuals seeking to promote human rights. So that's pretty broad. And initially, it was only a dozen or more, maybe 16 or 20 of the Russians, and then it was expanded to be called the Global Magnitsky Act. Why Magnitsky? What does the global have to do with Magnitsky? This is Browder still fighting to keep the name in there, because it's the William Browder Protection Act, and that's why it's called the Magnitsky Act. And if you want to go after human rights violations, what about Netanyahu? Seems to me he should be the first one on your list.
Well, it also, just to understand this for our audience, the Magnitsky Act is a subset of the SDN, which is the Specially Designated Nationals. And with that, you're talking 17,000 names. So really, it's was a great deal as far as
Well, when it started,
legitimizing death.
it was used, when it started, it was only about Browder, protecting
Right.
Browder, and also throwing in Khodorkovsky, protecting Khodorkovsky, because he was also a crook. Then it got expanded by other people to this global effort. But in the beginning, it was only about Browder. And Browder still goes on the air and gives TED Talks and is quoted all the time about his lawyer, quote, his lawyer, who's actually his crooked accountant, is cooperating crooked accountant, and the whole rest of the story. So people need to understand that when they talk about the Magnitsky Act, that's what they're talking about. Then it got expanded to the Global Act. And of course, there were some people that didn't want to call in the European Union, they passed something similar. And there were some people that didn't want to call it the global thing, Magnitsky. And he fought that because basically he wants the name Magnitsky. Browder didn't care about anything else. And he threatened the person, member of parliament, who wanted to do that. And he said, look what happened to this guy in Canada. He helped knock off a big-time politician in Canada who was not going along with his Magnitsky Act in Canada. He said, look what I did to him. I can do the same thing to you. And this is true. I mean, this is publicly said.
Well, one thing I just wanted to circle.
Something else. It became much more important than the Russians, because at this point, it's irrelevant. Most of those people in Russia don't have American bank accounts and are not getting on a plane and coming to New York or Washington. So it's basically, it was to partly it was to demonize Russia. It was to demonize Putin. The whole fake story was to demonize Russia. The actual money involved of the people who are accused is very limited. These are not important people. None of them are important people. It was used to demonize Putin.
It's also used.
We have to wrap up.
Is also used to extract these large amounts of money with a justification. We have $358 billion that was frozen just with Russia. Okay, so I agree with Jeremy. Yes, the Cold War did help, and then but also you have to look at Iran, and it's 100 to 120 billion in sanctions. Venezuela, 22 billion. Afghanistan, 8 billion. Libya, 37 billion. So this is big money. It's beyond Russia. It's a whole organization. So, with that, Lucy, I'd like to go back to you. Please let our audience know how they can follow your important work and really get into the details, because what Lucy is really teaching us here is a very complex story. When you're dealing with this money laundering and this tax avoidance, it's a complicated picture, and Lucy really breaks it down wonderfully in her articles. And perhaps Jayme could just flash one as Lucy tells our audience how they can follow her important work.
Well, my website is thekomisarscoop.com, TheKomisarscoop.com. The articles I just wrote were for therealistreview.com, which is spelled like it sounds. And I'm going to take the article in the Realist Review and in a week or so put it on my own website, including a lot of more graphics and links. So you can find it on either place. On X, the handle I use is @LucyKomisar. And my name is spelled in front of you so you can see the spelling. So that's where you can get it. Everything goes on to thekomisarscoop.com. I also put things on Facebook sometimes and on LinkedIn, but everything will go on to, and also on X. If I write anything any place, I put a link on X. So it's very easy. If you sign up with the website, which is free, you can find whatever I'm doing.
And that's Lucy, Lucy, Komisar. Let's see. How do we spell? Please spell.
It's
KOMS.
No, KOMISAR, but it was written on the screen until a moment ago.
Yeah, I know. I was hoping to read it, and then Jayme took it down. But this is also for our audio audience. So what's written on the screen is not visible to our listeners.
Right. It's Lucy, Lucy, Komisar,
.com.
.com.
And the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today.
One of the first journalism jobs I ever had was at BAI. It was in the 60s.
Wonderful.
In the 60s.
Wow. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. You can also find us, Uncontrolled Opposition, on Substack, Twitter, X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. If you want to say anything else, we're still live. So nobody take their clothes off or say anything that anyone will get yelled at for by a loved one.
We don't want any Jeffrey Tubin incidents here.
Oh, God.
So,
and and they brought him back. They put him back on the air. He's really horrible. He was horrible even before he did his stuff.
So right now, if you look at your screen, you are live. We're just not. This is not the recorded portion for WBAI or Progressive Radio Network.
Okay.
I'm going to have to check off in 2 minutes.
Well, Jeremy, you had a few questions, and you kind of got stepped on a bit.
I got them in at the end. So.
Okay. And Lucy, did you want to finish any points? You have a wealth. You have a college class on this topic. I mean, the detail is phenomenal.
On my website, you will see the article, which is the summary of the Browder story at the top. That's on my website right now. And there's also, if you click on something called the Browder Hoax, there are dozens of articles I've written over the years, really, more than 10 years. And you can find the Avisma story there and many of these other stories in great detail, whereas the article at the top, which is about Browder, the con man, that will pretty much give a little bit of everything, as I tried to do today. But if people want more details and also want the links to a lot of the testimony I cited, the links are always very careful to put in all the documentation. So please go to the website, the komisarscoop.com, and you also get there by lucykomisar.com, and look at the top story, which is Browder, the con man, and you'll find a lot of information.
One quick question before I have to go. Did Browder ever harass you? Because I actually once published a review of Alex Craner's book on the Huffington Post, and I was threatened by his lawyer, and I didn't have the resources, and I think the Huffington Post actually removed it without even consulting me. I wonder if he ever tried to threaten you.
He once made somebody, I think, sent. Well, one of my stories was run by 100 reporters, one of my early stories, and that's also on my website. And I think he contacted them about something, and the editor said, everything on our story is documented, and he went away. He never sues anybody. He never. Could you imagine? My feeling is, come after me. I would love to be in the witness stand and ask you questions. I would love it. Nothing better. Nobody will. He will never do that. He won't sue, because if you sue, then you go to court, and then he gets before a judge and he swears, and you ask questions, or your lawyer asks questions. I would love it. The only time there was a woman in Denmark who wrote a book about him and about other things more European, and he gave a lot of nasty quotes about me. She never called me for a comment to say, what do you say about this? I found that pretty awful as a journalist. I will always contact people if I write about them. Of course, I can't do Browder because he has already said he won't talk to me. Basically, has knocked me out of his all connections. So, but he knows.
That's an interesting story. There, you reached out to him, and can you tell us a little bit about that? It's
Well, I mean, this is way in the past, and it was interesting. That's when I was doing the Avisma story, and so I got all these documents, and then there's a guy named at Barron's named Bill Alpert, who is a journalist and an editor. And somehow I don't know how I got in touch. I don't remember now. But I said, hey, listen, I really have a very good story. And are you interested? And I told him what it was. And I have to go to Philadelphia to look through boxes of documents. And are you interested? And can you pay for me to go there? I mean, as a freelance journalist, you're really careful about everything, even the money on a train, New York, Philadelphia. He said, oh, yes, we'll pay for that. And so I did that. They had a great copy machine. So I got hundreds of pages in a minimal time, all put on a floppy disk. At that time, it was disks. And so I came back and I gave him, I said, this is the story. And I have all these documents and this is the story, on and on and on. And I'm calling Browder. And I called Browder at his office in London. And he refused to talk to me. I said to Bill Alpert, well, what about this story? He doesn't want to talk to me, but, well, I talked to him. He says it's all not true. What? We're not running it. I found out Browder, he is an acolyte of Browder. He's such a fake. Hey, can I say this? Bill Alpert, editor and writer at Barron's, is a fake. And actually, Browder, in his testimony in New York federal court, when he was asked where he got some information, Bill Alpert, also OCCRP, which is another fake organization, which is a fake media organization run by a guy named Sullivan, who refused to condemn the jailing of Julian Assange. That's how good that guy is. That's the next story I'm doing is about OCCRP. But so Bill Alpert is one, and that's really interesting. Most of the reporters, I think, for the major media that are not telling the truth, I don't think are buddies and acolytes of Browder. Bill Alpert of Barron's is an acolyte of Browder. He should not be in that job.
Lucy, when I was looking at your profile, you had published in some very major media. Could you recite some of the places where your work has appeared?
Yeah, in the 80s, I spent months in the Central America, so I wrote about El Salvador. I was told that I wrote in the LA Times, I did a long op-ed, and I was told I did the first American piece against U.S. policy in El Salvador. I met the nuns who were later murdered. I rode in the Jeep with some of the nuns that were later murdered. So that was in that period in the 80s. I went to also Nicaragua, Honduras, and so I did a lot of writing on that. I also wrote about Eastern Europe at a time when the Soviet Union still existed. And I wrote about dissidence movements in Eastern Europe. And in fact, I wrote about the dissident movements in East Germany. And when later I went with a group of journalists, American journalists, we were invited on a trip, which included, it was mostly West Germany, but it included going to East Germany. And I had, by the way, after the first story I wrote about East Germany, tried to go back and they wouldn't let me in at the border, the East Germans. So when I went with a group of Western reporters, we were going to visit the equivalent of the American ambassador of East Germany. His name was Richard Barkley. And I said, I think you better check, because last time I tried, they didn't let me in. So we got to the border. Everybody goes in except Lucy. I'm sorry. In German, Ihre Einreise in die DDR ist nicht erwünscht. Your entrance into the GDR is not desired. I said to the people running the trip, I told you this was going to happen. So they said, wait here. So they contacted Richard Barkley. The funny thing about it, I played tennis in New York with his ex-wife, Brigitte Barkley. So they finally let me in. I got to Barkley. The rest of the group had gone on to the next appointment. He said, so what have you been doing? I said, well, I was writing about the dissidents. I said, do you think I could come back tomorrow? Because I'm going to stay a little longer when they're going home back to the U.S. He said, he picked up the phone. I'm calling the Interior Minister, and you can ask them. So he gave me the phone. I said, hello, thank you for letting me into your country today. Can I come back tomorrow? I wouldn't advise it. So I didn't get back, not until the wall fell. So the funny thing is, after the wall fell, I met at an event in New York, somebody working for the new German government. And I said, and there were, by the way, the Stasi, the secret police, had a lot of files. I said, I wonder if they had a file on me because I couldn't get in. He said, I will check it out. Which I still have 300 pages. Most of it were just copies of things because I had spent a night there, and it was in a hotel at one point, and they had broken into my suitcase and they copied a lot of things.
Wow.
Press releases, it was silly stuff, and also names I had of people in various countries that I was visiting, and they had that. And then I wrote about my Stasi file, and I found out that the person who had told on me was a blonde guitar player, looked like a hippie, and they were threatening him. They had something over him, so he became known as the person who had ratted on peace people. But it was very funny. And Lucy, she's sitting with, there was a well-known person named Babel Bolai. She's sitting at an ice cream cafe and she's typing on this gadget. It was one of the early computers. That's what I was typing on. But all of this was there. And so those are some of the interesting things that I have done. So actually, it's sort of funny. Politically, it wasn't whether you for or against government policy. It was whether you told the truth about any of the stories that you were doing. So when I wrote about East Europeans, I told the truth about what I saw. And when I wrote about Central America, I told the truth about what I saw. And I think I'm still doing that.
You are. Thank you so much. It's amazing. But also, what publications? I think they were some very illustrious publications that
at that time, yeah, but I could write. I've written in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times. Not on Browder, not on the Magnitsky story. They
wouldn't publish that.
But on Browder, on Washington Post, I wrote about when I visited Zaire, and I was followed by the secret police, and I got help from the local U.S. officials when I was being followed by the secret police. At one point, I was in Lubumbashi, which was the second city, and I was followed. And I actually got a call from the hotel, which was very nice. They knew where I was going on my next stop because I was expecting a package and it didn't come. So I said, look, if it comes, this is where I'm going to be. They actually called the next stop. I was visiting a tribal chieftain, and he said, I'm talking to your hotel, and the Mobutu people are following you. And he said, I can call the U.S. attaché here in Lubumbashi. He did. The U.S. attaché sent a car to pick me up, took me, I think, to the, it wasn't an embassy, but it was just the attaché place, gave me a nice lunch, and I was about to leave, took me with the attaché, with the car, ignoring where you have to check in at an airport, took me on the tarmac right up to the gate and the stairway leading into the plane. Wow. And so they certainly were very helpful. And I wrote a piece in the Washington Post called Our Man in Lubumbashi. So, but they'll write things like that.
Fascinating.
I've got to run, Lucy. It's been great talking to you and having you. So, and we'll be in touch about the radio show next week for the COVID action thing.
Yeah. And sorry about my computer malfunction.
Oh, everything always goes wrong when you're doing live. It's just my teleprompter drove me nuts. No more teleprompter.
Well, thanks for Jeremy showing up and asking all those great questions. Yeah, the live stuff. It's like everything that could go wrong today seemed to go wrong.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone have a lovely day, night, and I'm gonna head out. And thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Jayme.
Yep. Thank you, Lucy. It was a very interesting. You've had a very exciting life with your journalism. It's amazing. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. This has been Uncontrolled Opposition. And if you can listen to us on the radio, please do so and follow us on all the social media. But we'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks again, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.